Hi everyone, my name is Andre, and hello from Singapore, where I am currently at the moment. Although I am a PhD candidate at the University of Edinburgh, and I'm co-supervised by Alex Chow. Some of you might know him at Edinburgh. And I'm especially happy to be at this conference and hearing all of these great conversations in these past days. All the more because I'm not quite yet a theologian, and I'm in fact a linguistics student at the university, where I'm doing my PhD largely from a kind of from a social linguistic perspective, and that has kind of been my interest to work at this area, this intersection of religion and language, with these social semiotic multimodal frameworks. And at the same time, I found, of course, the value of working and extending these ideas into some theological ideas, which many of you have been looking at for years. And it's just been a very productive time for me to hear about these perspectives as well, and to encourage my own work, how the same topic can be approached from different areas and perspectives. And so today I call my talk Inculturating to the Internet, memes at the intersection of Catholic and digital cultures. And of course, we know that memes are quite a popular area of research, especially among scholars of religion and scholars of linguistics. I thought that this might be a good way to approach this rather broad topic of Catholicism on social media. And of course, scholars in digital religion, including Heidi Campbell and other people, have started to think about what memes might be doing for the church. And I hope to extend these ideas a little bit through my talk today. I have two rather modest goals for my presentation today, which I hope to achieve at the end of this talk. The first of which is to present the idea of inculturation as a theological lens towards the problem, so to speak, of culture. And I would just give some points as to why I think inculturation might be a suitable frame in which we can understand and theorize this question of the relationship between Christ and culture. And secondly, the larger goal of my PhD work, I think, is to work towards to demonstrate the emergence of what we might call a digital Catholic imagination. And here I've used the two words culture imagination somewhat interchangeably, although perhaps there might be some distinction to be made between these two terms. And I think later in my talk, I will mention briefly how I think these two terms might be related, but also how they might be disambiguated perhaps in future work. And of course, the idea of digital culture has been approached from both a sociological perspective, and Catherine Schmidt, who spoke yesterday, has spoken about digital culture in relation to Christianity, and bringing with it its various characteristics, which are quite important and quite useful towards understanding how digital culture might be related to theology. The idea of enculturation, I think, as I understand it, has emerged particularly more so in light of the Vatican II era. Although, of course, the idea of enculturation and how faith enters into various cultures in different ways has been an idea that has stretched all the way from the biblical Greco-Roman world. And of course, closer to my own background and geographical place in this world, I think about the example of the 16th century Jesuit Matteo Ricci in Beijing and his attempts. And in this picture, we see Ricci and his companion, Paul Chi, and their method of evangelizing through entering into Chinese culture, even as an Italian person working and living in China. And at the bottom, we see a chasuble that belonged to the Benedictine monk, Pierre Celestine Low, who lived in the mid 20th century. And we see how there are Chinese motifs in his chasuble. And these are little ways in which we conceive of enculturation. And I think this idea of enculturation is quite interesting. In the 1988 Vatican document, Faith and Enculturation, where it says the term enculturation includes the notion of growth, of the mutual enrichment of persons and groups, rendered possible by the encounter of the gospel and the social cultural milieu. I put here enculturation and the geographical world because this is a point that I come back to later, where I suspect that the idea of enculturation has largely been used thus far in a very geographical sense. So enculturation into geographically specific cultures. But what happens when you have an idea of digital culture, where you have cultures that transcend geographical boundaries, that have a kind of global dimension to it, and where we might speak of world Christianity? How can the idea of enculturation still help us to understand broader dynamics that are not along geographical lines, but perhaps on other kinds of social, cultural, even economic, social class lines? And how might this idea of enculturation help us to better understand, to make sense of these ways of in which our world is divided? A related question is this question of Christ and culture, and I think this is also a key cornerstone of Vatican II documents. And I think quite a bit early on, we have Richard Niebuhr's quite very seminal book, Christ and Culture, where he talked about Christ against and culture, Christ above culture as a way of conceptualizing this relationship. More recently, Catherine Tanner's book, Theology of Culture, asks quite important questions in an overview of the relationship between Christ and culture. I think towards the same question that Niebuhr asks. And she asks, do Christians form the sort of social group that can claim to have its own culture? Perhaps quite an important question in our thinking about digital culture and Christianity. I think in a lot of Vatican II documents in Lumen Gentium, there is quite often a lot of talk about the relationship between the gospel and whatever good lies latent in the religious practices and cultures of diverse peoples. And so this idea of going into cultures, to specific cultures, provides us with a good sign that this idea of culture, of engaging with the topic of digital culture and Christianity, is indeed an important and an essential one. And so perhaps this idea of enculturation, which has been used by a term that's used largely by Catholics, but I think in other contexts we might have the terms including contextual theology, and how this might be a process of engagement between the gospel and a particular culture, might be applicable to digital cultures as well. It is interesting to see that the Vatican itself, in its last document about the internet, 2002, the Church and the Internet, speaking of the internet as a culture, or speaking of the media culture, and they describe, for example, in the first quote about how it is necessary to integrate the message of the gospel into the new culture created by modern communications, and where the media is seen as part of a still unfolding culture where applications are as yet imperfectly understood. The internet, which is bringing about revolutionary communication, is also interested in this relationship. It's changing the way cultures relate to cultures. And I think this gives me a lot of hope of conversations that we're having in this conference as to furthering these questions that have been posed some 20 years ago, before the age of social media, and which are still very relevant questions to ask today, especially in light of media technologies that are commonplace in this day and age. The my own kind of empirical point in this paper involving memes, I think, is because I think in this book by Schiffman, where he discusses the role of memes in digital culture, he says the meme is the best concept to encapsulate some of the most fundamental aspects of the internet in general, and of the so-called participatory or web culture, Web 2.0 culture. The idea of the definition of memes is perhaps something that is somewhat developing and still changing, and I think what they share in common, they are text over images, although as we will see in some examples in a minute, there's quite a wide variety and quite a wide spectrum in terms of what kind of memes we see relating to Catholic culture. I like the term semiotic artifacts, which kind of suggests that there is indeed a very broad range of images that we might or might not consider as memes. And Schiffman here has a more specific definition as digital items which are circulated and transformed on social media platforms. And even, for example, the memes in which memes spread is something that is has kind of wide variety, of course. Sometimes shared on social media, sometimes shared on messaging pages and so on. I think quite crucially, we see that digital communication technologies have importance as a system of infrastructure. And this infrastructure suggests that the means in which we understand religion and religious practice, in which the church operates in different parts of the world, is definitely being shaped by communication technologies, including the use of social media and memes, as many of us have surely noted in our own research. Following from Jacobson's, Robin Jacobson's functions of language, I want to suggest that there are perhaps some things that memes are doing in their presence online. And this is part of my ongoing research, where I hope to more systematically map out the functions and the ways in which memes are being used in the Christian world. And I would like to suggest that these things, these possible functions, point towards this larger point of the emergence of Catholic digital culture. I think what is quite interesting is to see how many meme-specific pages there are on Facebook and Instagram alone, relating to very, very specific aspects of Catholic life. So some of them might be quite broadly named pages like Catholic memes, lit Catholic memes. Some of them have to do with more particular aspects of Catholic culture. And we have, for example, the emergence of traditional Catholicism, and as a site in which a lot of these memes have emerged. So we have pages like purely papist posting, thread Catholic memes, for example, where we see they emerge to more particular dimensions of Catholic culture. And of course, other than these meme-specific pages, we see that clergy themselves on their own social media pages are engaging in this language of memes. Bishop Richard Umbers, see some examples from his page in a minute, who is the auxiliary bishop of Sydney, frequently uses memes as a form of catechesis on his social media pages. And we see how the institutional church is beginning to adopt the language of digital culture in its own messaging through these pages. I'd like to suggest that the first quite obvious function of memes is humor, of course, right? And so perhaps to think about how language, there's a kind of wordplay in semiotics. We call this a process of resemiotization, which happens when memes, of course, are popular images associated with different aspects of pop culture are circulated, and they take on a Christian dimension when the text or the images are somehow reframed in order to fit the context. So, for example, in the third example here of Marie Kondo, of course, and people might know that the original text would have said something like, "I'm so excited because I love Mass," and of course this has been reframed to "because I love Mass" in the Christian meme page. And in these ways, these humorous ways in which the meme pages adopt images that are associated with pop culture or various current affairs, current events, and they take on a Christian dimension in their use on these Christian sites. The idea of catechesis and all these examples are from Bishop Richard Umbers' Instagram or Facebook page, where he frequently looks at more specific dimensions of Catholic teaching, and he uses memes as a way of catechizing and teaching Catholics. And it's not even well, it is to an extent an evangelization, a kind of evangelical means. But I think the kind of knowledge required in order to understand them suggests that there's something a bit more happening in these memes that he shares. I think it's quite interesting to see how more erudite and more very specific topics and the intellectual dimension of the faith, which is appealing to some segment of young people in the church, can be combined with pop culture in the way that suggests that it is not just merely humorous, but in fact possessing some kind of catechetical or doctrinal point. And for example, in these additional examples of capital memes, we see at the at the top the image which cites the verb, and which suggests that that's something someone interested in the topic might want to look at, And so there are these quite complex ways in which memes are being used as a result of the institutional church communicating on the internet. A somewhat darker dimension of the use of memes can be observed in social political commentary in different parts of the church. We see that aspects of Twitter, Catholic Twitter, where quite often the culture wars somewhat associated with the American church, which the discourses of which have spread to other parts of the world as well, can be observed on these meme pages that specifically address disputes between liberals and progressives that have to do with dimensions of traditionalism, and we can see how these issues have been discussed through these memes, and so these meme pages have become a site in which Catholicism has become contested, and what it means to be Catholic, what it means to be a good Catholic, has become a point of contention through these through the language of digital culture, through the language of memes. And already what we can see from these few examples that I have showed so far is the emergence of perhaps a kind of a Catholic culture, Catholic imagination. I draw inspiration from Andrew Greeley's book from the year 2000, and he says this special Catholic imagination can be called sacramental. And he suggests that Catholics have this enchanted view of the world, and we see the Catholic imagination present in the Church's 7 sacraments, but also in various aspects of pop culture, in various aspects of ways in which people have become associated, have known Catholicism through Catholic schools, through movies and other aspects of culture, and where these aspects of Catholicness have coalesced to that might be suggested to become a culture or an imagination, one that is sacramental. And my own idea here is to think about how this might suggest the emergence of not just Catholic culture, but a Catholic digital culture, where aspects of childhood memories or very particular aspects of Catholic life have become a part of the use of social media on the part of Catholics all around the world. And I suppose the point about digital culture is, and this mediatization of Catholic life begs the question of how it might be related to Catholic life offline as well, the experience of Catholics in the pews, and now which has become mediatized and transformed to Catholicism on the web as well. And certainly this there are links that we can see between these two ways in which the two forms of Catholic life which are emerging and which are being practiced both online and offline. The idea of the use of memes, I think, has particular ecclesial questions for Catholics in particular, and there are a few things that we might briefly observe from the examples that we've seen today. The first of which, of course, is the Vatican II call for the empowerment of the laity, and we can see how participatory media, in which anyone, you and I, have the ability to create and start pages on the internet and to share images and to participate in these conversations, means that there's a kind of reshaping, I think, of the ways in which the faith is being communicated, in which Catholicism is being talked about online. And so perhaps a few hundred years ago, it might be possible for the Vatican to list the books that are banned, right? That shouldn't be read by Catholics. And now with the internet, that dynamic, that relationship of authority has surely been transformed. And I think the second point that I made here is the geographic boundaries of Catholic life. I think it's becoming blurred, and the very traditional ways in which parish territories have been a means in which the church is governed, is transforming as the geographic boundaries of Catholic life are being lost to the effects of digital media and the internet. This perhaps suggests that there's an emergence of a global Catholicism that is becoming more difficult to map, as links between churches in different parts of the world are becoming connected through these social media sites. So once again, coming back to the document, The Church and the Internet, I think the Vatican suggests that the development of anthropology and the theology of communication is so much needed 20 years after this document has been published. And in my own thinking and in our conversations, I'm very hopeful of to see where this might lead to in the coming years, especially it is important work investigating how theology and spirituality are related to our everyday experiences of digital media communications and the internet. So thanks very much for coming to my talk today, and I'm looking forward to any comments or feedback you might have, whether after this talk or by email as well. Thank you.